February 9th, 2026, 0347 local time, 18 nautical miles north of Havana Harbor. Two of the slowest warships in the United States Navy are heading directly toward Cuban territorial waters, USS Pioneer and USS Patriot. Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships. Displacement, 1,312 tons. Top speed, 13.5 knots. Armament, 2.50 caliber machine guns. No missiles, no torpedoes, no armor worth mentioning. Wooden hulls. Fiberglass superstructure, designed to be invisible to magnetic mines, and almost invisible to everyone else. Sending these ships toward a potentially hostile coastline without destroyer escort is either the most reckless decision Naval Forces Southern Command has made in a decade, or the most calculated. The answer depends on what was sitting inside a Cuban military warehouse, 40 kilometers southeast of Havana. I'm your host at Navy Sea Power, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we're reconstructing an operation that never made headlines. An operation that revolved around weapons that were never deployed, a threat that was never confirmed, and a message that was delivered without a single shot fired. Because sometimes the most dangerous naval operation isn't about what's in the water. It's about proving you can find what isn't there yet. To understand why two wooden-hulled minesweepers ended up off Havana in February 2026, you need to go back 5 weeks. To a cargo vessel called the MV Catatumbo, registered in Caracas, flagged Venezuelan, with a crew manifest that listed 22 sailors and a cargo hold full of industrial pumping equipment. The Catatumbo departed Puerto Cabello, Venezuela, on January 3, 2026. Standard departure, standard route. Nothing unusual for a vessel making regular runs between Venezuelan and Cuban ports. Except the Catatumbo wasn't carrying pumping equipment. According to intelligence assessments compiled by the Office of Naval Intelligence, the vessel's actual cargo included between 18 and 24 EM-52 rising mines, Iranian-manufactured, shipped from Bandar Abbas to Puerto Cabello, through a logistics chain that U.S. intelligence had been tracking since November 2025. The EM-52 is not a sophisticated weapon by modern standards. It sits on the seabed at depths up to 200 meters. When its acoustic sensor detects a ship passing overhead, it launches a torpedo-shaped projectile upward at the hull, effective against surface vessels up to destroyer size. Unit cost, approximately $250,000. Cheap, simple, devastating if deployed correctly. The Florida Straits carry roughly 30% of all U.S.-bound oil tanker traffic from the Gulf of Mexico. A single confirmed mine in those waters wouldn't just threaten ships. It would spike maritime insurance rates overnight and send energy markets into chaos. And someone in Tehran understood that equation perfectly. The question that landed on the desk of Vice Admiral Patricia Hernandez, commander of U.S. Naval Forces Southern Command, wasn't whether the mines existed. Intelligence had high confidence on that. Satellite imagery from January 7th showed the Catatumbo being offloaded at Mariel Port under heavy tarpaulin cover, with Cuban military trucks waiting. Signals intelligence intercepted communications between Cuban Revolutionary Navy headquarters and a warehouse facility near Bajucal, referencing special cargo requiring climate-controlled storage. The mines were in Cuba. That much was near certain. The question was what Cuba intended to do with them, and that question had no clear answer. Hernandez convened an intelligence assessment on January 14th at Southcom headquarters in Doral, Florida. 3 scenarios were on the table. First, Cuba acquired the mines as a deterrent, warehouse them, let their existence leak, and use the implicit threat to gain leverage in ongoing sanctions negotiations. Second, Cuba planned to pre-position the mines in coastal waters as a defensive measure, mining its own harbors against potential U.S. naval action. Third, Cuba intended to covertly deploy the mines in the Florida Straits, an an act of economic warfare that would be nearly impossible to attribute with certainty. The intelligence community leaned towards Scenario 1. The State Department agreed. The mines were a bargaining chip, not a weapon. Hernandez disagreed. Not because she had better intelligence, but because she understood something the analysts' models didn't capture: risk asymmetry. If the assessment was wrong, if even 3 or 4 EM-52s ended up on the seabed of the Florida Straits, the consequences would be catastrophic and irreversible. Tanker traffic would halt. The Navy would spend months sweeping an area of over 3,000 square nautical miles. Energy prices would surge, and the U.S. would look impotent. The cost of being wrong about Scenario 3 was orders of magnitude higher than the cost of being wrong about Scenario 1. So Hernandez made the call. Deploy the minesweepers, sweep the approaches, send the message, and do it quietly enough that it wouldn't trigger a diplomatic crisis, but loudly enough that Havana would notice. The problem with mine countermeasure operations is that they cannot be done quickly, and they cannot be done invisibly. The AN/SQQ-32 mine-hunting sonar aboard the Avenger-class ships operates at frequencies specifically designed to detect objects on the seabed. Its acoustic signature is distinctive. Any naval force with hydrophones, and Cuba has them, would know exactly what Pioneer and Patriot were doing the moment they began active sonar sweeps. Hernandez needed a cover story. She got one from the annual exercise calendar. Unitas Atlantic, a multinational naval exercise conducted with partner nations in the Caribbean, was scheduled for March 2026. Hernandez's staff inserted a mine countermeasure training phase into the exercise plan, backdated the planning documents to October 2025, and designated the waters north of Cuba as the exercise area. Routine training. Nothing provocative. The paperwork was clean. The timing was anything but. Pioneer and Patriot departed Naval Station Mayport, Florida on February 7, 2026. Transit time to the operating area, approximately 36 hours at their maximum sustained speed of 12 knots. They traveled without escort. No destroyers, no frigates, no Coast Guard cutters. This was deliberate. An escort would signal a combat operation. 2 minesweepers alone signaled confidence. The Navy was saying, we don't need protection because we don't consider this a threat environment. We're just sweeping. The subtext was different. The subtext was, we know what you received. We know where it is. And we're making sure none of it reaches the water. February 9th, 0347. Pioneer activated its SQQ-32 sonar in the northern approaches to the Old Bahama Channel. Patriot began its sweep pattern 11 nautical miles to the east, covering the approaches from the Nicholas Channel. The sonar pattern was methodical. Each ship towed an AN/SLQ-48 mine neutralization vehicle, a remotely operated submersible equipped with cameras, sonar, and cable cutters. The MNVs could identify objects on the seabed at depths up to 180 meters and transmit real-time imagery back to the ship's mine warfare control room. The sweep rate was agonizingly slow. At 4 knots, the optimal towing speed for accurate sonar returns, each ship could cover roughly 1.5 square nautical miles per hour. The designated sweep area covered approximately 400 square nautical miles. The math was brutal. 2 ships, operating around the clock with crew rotations every 8 hours, would need a minimum of 11 days to complete the sweep with 90% confidence. 11 days of crawling through waters 18 miles from a potentially hostile shore. 11 days at 4 knots with wooden hulls and machine guns. The crew of Pioneer knew the vulnerability calculus. Lieutenant Commander James Okoro, Pioneer's commanding officer, had briefed his 81-person crew before departure. The brief was succinct. They would be operating in waters where hostile mines might be present. Their ship was designed to survive mine detonation better than any other vessel in the fleet. The wooden hull and low magnetic signature reduced trigger risk, but survive didn't mean unscathed. An EM-52 rising mine detonating against their hull would likely cause catastrophic flooding. Response time from the nearest U.S. warship capable of providing assistance, at least 4 hours. Every sailor aboard understood what that meant. The first 48 hours of the sweep produced exactly what Hernandez expected. Nothing. The seabed north of Havana was littered with the usual debris: old anchors, corroded cable, fishing equipment, the occasional sunken small craft. The SQQ-32 flagged each contact. The MNV investigated. None were mines. But on the morning of February 11th, something changed. Not in the water, on the surface. Cuban Revolutionary Navy Patrol Boat 401, a Soviet-era Avenger-class vessel, departed Havana Harbor at 0614 and turned north, heading directly toward Pioneer's operating area. This was expected. What was not expected was what followed. Over the next 3 hours, 4 additional Cuban naval vessels put to sea, 2 more Avenger-class patrol boats, 1 Rio de Muji-class coastal patrol vessel, and 1 vessel that made Okoro's operations officer pause, a Cuban Navy diving support ship that intelligence had not previously confirmed as operational. 5 Cuban warships and a dive support vessel, all heading toward the sweep area. Okoro reported to Southcom. Hernandez already knew. A P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating at 28,000 feet had been tracking every vessel that left Havana since February 8th. The P-8A's surface search radar painted the Cuban vessels clearly. Their course and speed put them on an intercept with Pioneer in approximately 90 minutes. Okoro faced a decision. The rules of engagement were clear. Pioneer was operating in international waters, conducting a lawful exercise. Cuba had every right to send naval vessels to observe. There was no basis for evasive action, and breaking off the sweep would undermine the entire operation's purpose. But Pioneer was functionally unarmed against anything larger than a small boat. If the Cuban vessels intended harassment, close passes, wake interference, radio challenges, there was little Okoro could do except document and continue. He continued. At 0847, Patrol Boat 401 closed to within 2,000 yards of Pioneer. The Cuban vessel reduced speed, matching Pioneer's 4-knot crawl. It began circling at a distance of roughly 1,500 yards. Close enough to observe, far enough to avoid a navigational incident. The circling continued for 6 hours. The other Cuban vessels took up station at varying distances, forming a loose cordon around both Pioneer and Patriot. The dive support vessel held position 3 nautical miles south, between the U.S. minesweepers and Cuban territorial waters. The message from Havana was clear: we're watching too. What Havana didn't know was that the P-8A overhead was doing more than tracking surface vessels. Its AN/APY-10 radar and acoustic processing systems were building a comprehensive picture of Cuban naval activity, response times, communications patterns, and harbor readiness. Every time a Cuban vessel transmitted on radio, the Poseidon's electronic surveillance measures captured the frequency, duration, and bearing. Every course change was logged, every speed adjustment recorded. The minesweep was the stated mission. Intelligence collection was the bonus. Day 4, February 12th. Hernandez received an update that complicated everything. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency delivered new satellite imagery of the warehouse facility near Bajukal. Compared to imagery from January 15th, the new photos showed significant activity. Vehicle tracks in the compound had doubled. A previously sealed loading bay was open. And most critically, thermal imaging showed that refrigeration units attached to the building had been activated. EM-52 mines contain battery packs that degrade in tropical heat. Activating refrigeration meant someone was concerned about maintaining the mines in operational condition. You don't cool weapons you plan to keep in storage indefinitely. You cool weapons you intend to use. Hernandez elevated her assessment. Scenario 3, covert deployment in the Florida Straits, moved from possible to probable. She requested additional assets. Within 18 hours, the request produced results. The destroyer USS Pinckney, an Arleigh Burke-class DDG operating in the Eastern Caribbean, was redirected to a patrol station 50 nautical miles northeast of Pioneer's operating area. Officially, routine repositioning. In reality, insurance. Pinckney carried 96 vertical launch cells, Aegis combat system, and SH-60 Seahawk helicopters with dipping sonar. If things escalated, Pinckney could be on station within 2 hours. The second asset was less visible, but more significant. A Los Angeles-class attack submarine, hull number undisclosed in any reporting, took up station in deep water south of the sweep area. Its mission: monitor the approaches from Havana Harbor and detect any submarine or vessel attempting to deploy objects on the seabed. The Cuban Navy doesn't operate submarines, but a vessel doesn't need to be a submarine to lay mines. Any fishing boat, cargo vessel, or even a modified pleasure craft can drop a mine over the side under cover of darkness. The submarine's passive sonar would detect any vessel approaching the sweep area from the south. Its presence was never acknowledged publicly. Day 6, February 14th, a development that nobody predicted. Pioneer's SQQ-32 sonar flagged a contact on the seabed at a depth of 87 meters. The signature was consistent with a cylindrical metallic object approximately 1.8 meters in length, partially buried in sediment. Bearing and position placed it directly in the deep-water shipping channel used by tankers transiting the Florida Straits. Okoro's mine warfare officer classified the contact as a possible mine. The MNV was deployed for visual identification, 11 minutes of descent and approach. The control room aboard Pioneer went silent. On the display screen, the MNV's camera showed murky water, particulate matter, and then a shape in the sediment. Cylindrical, metal, partially encrusted. Approximately the right dimensions. But the corrosion pattern was wrong. EM-52 mines are constructed with anti-corrosion coatings designed for tropical waters. This object showed decades of marine growth. The MNV circled it twice. Close-up imagery revealed riveted construction, a technique not used in modern mine manufacturing. Assessment: World War II-era unexploded ordnance, likely a depth charge or torpedo section that had been sitting on the seabed for 80 years. Pioneer's crew exhaled, but the 11 minutes of uncertainty had reminded every sailor aboard what they were looking for, and what it would mean to find it. The sweep continued. Day after day, 4 knots, sonar pings, MNV deployments on contacts that turned out to be debris, geology, or marine life. The Cuban patrol boats maintained their watch, rotating fresh vessels every 12 hours in a pattern the P-8A tracked meticulously. On February 17th, Okoro's signals intelligence operator reported something new. Cuban naval radio traffic had shifted. The patrol boats were now communicating with a shore station using encrypted burst transmissions, short, compressed data packets that were virtually impossible to decode in real time, but whose very existence indicated a change in operational posture. Cuba was treating this as more than an observation exercise. Someone in Havana was making decisions. February 19th, Day 11, final sweep day, Pioneer and Patriot had covered 94% of the designated area. Total contacts investigated, 847. Contacts classified as possible mines, 0. Confirmed mines, 0. The Florida Straits, as far as the U.S. Navy could determine with high confidence, were clean. But Hernandez understood that clean today didn't mean clean tomorrow. Mines could be deployed in hours. The sweep had established a baseline. a comprehensive sonar map of the seabed that would make any future change detectable. If an EM-52 appeared on that seabed next month, the Navy would know exactly when it was placed and could narrow the deployment window to days or even hours. The sweep wasn't just clearing mines. It was building a surveillance foundation. Pioneer and Patriot broke off operations on February 20th and turned north toward Mayport. The Cuban patrol boats shadowed them to the edge of the operating area, then peeled off and returned to Havana. No incidents, no confrontations, no mines. But the operation's consequences were already rippling outward. On February 22nd, Havana issued a formal diplomatic protest through the Swiss embassy in Washington. The protest accused the United States of provocative military activities near Cuban territorial waters and demanded advance notification of future exercises in the region. The State Department's response was measured. The United States conducts routine training exercises in international waters consistent with international law. Cuba's concerns are noted. What neither side acknowledged publicly was the real conversation happening through back channels. According to sources familiar with the diplomatic exchanges, Cuba's foreign ministry communicated indirectly that the mines in the Bajucal warehouse were a sovereign defense acquisition, not intended for offensive deployment. The message included a subtle but unmistakable offer. Cuba would accept international monitoring of the facility if the United States eased specific sanctions on maritime spare parts that Cuba's aging naval fleet desperately needed. Hernandez's sweep had produced an opening for diplomacy that didn't exist 3 weeks earlier. The mines were still in Cuba, but now everyone knew that everyone knew they were there. The deeper problem remained unresolved. How did Iranian mines end up in Cuba? The intelligence trail traced through Venezuela, following a pattern that analysts recognized immediately. The same logistics chain, Iranian military cargo to Venezuelan ports, then transshipped to third-party destinations, had been documented in weapons transfers to Houthi forces in Yemen. The same shell companies, the same cargo vessel operators, the same deliberate fragmentation of shipping documentation designed to defeat sanctions enforcement. Iran was building a mine distribution network that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Caribbean. The EM-52s in Cuba were not an isolated transaction. They were a proof of concept. If mines could reach Havana, they could reach Managua. If they could transit Puerto Cabello, they could transit any port in the Western Hemisphere where Iranian commercial relationships provided cover. Admiral Hernandez's classified after-action assessment, delivered to the Joint Chiefs on March 4, 2026, contained 3 recommendations. First, establish a permanent mine warfare readiness rotation in the Florida Straits, with Avenger-class or future MCM vessels conducting quarterly sweeps. Second, expand surveillance of Venezuelan port activities to identify future weapons transshipments before they reach destination. Third, accelerate deployment of the Navy's next-generation mine countermeasure systems, including unmanned surface vessels and autonomous underwater vehicles capable of continuous seabed monitoring. The first recommendation was approved. The second was already underway. The third was classified as resource-constrained. Pentagon language for too expensive right now. Comment cleared. If you think Hernandez made the right call sending minesweepers without escort. Comment risk if you think it was reckless. Subscribe if you want to see how the Navy's mine warfare capability is evolving, because this story isn't over. Congress took notice. On March 12th, the Senate Armed Services Committee requested a classified briefing on what was described in committee communications as Iranian mine proliferation in the Western Hemisphere. The briefing, delivered by the Director of Naval Intelligence, lasted 4 hours. Details remain classified, but 2 senators who attended made public statements afterward expressing serious concern about gaps in U.S. mine warfare capacity. The United States Navy currently operates 11 Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships. Average age, over 30 years. Replacement timeline: uncertain. The littoral combat ship was supposed to fill the mine warfare gap with its mine countermeasure mission package. That program has faced persistent technical difficulties and schedule delays. 11 aging wooden ships. Against a global mine threat that is growing cheaper, more accessible, and more widely distributed every year. Pioneer and Patriot found no mines off Havana. The mission was a success by every operational metric. Sweep completed. Intelligence gathered. Diplomatic channel opened. Message delivered. But the operation exposed a vulnerability that no single deployment can fix. The Florida Straits are 90 miles wide. A determined adversary could deploy mines from a fishing boat at midnight and be back in port before dawn. Detecting those mines after the fact requires exactly the kind of slow, dangerous, ship-intensive operation that Pioneer and Patriot just completed. 11 days, 2 ships, 400 square nautical miles. The math doesn't scale. And somewhere in a warehouse near Bajucal, 18 to 24 Iranian-manufactured EM-52 rising mines sit in climate-controlled storage, waiting. Not deployed, not destroyed, not gone. The Navy proved it could find mines that weren't there. The question no one in Washington can answer is whether they'll find them in time when they are.